if you want to look up at Leicester and see something of the town, the history of the place, there's nowhere really better to start than here at the clock tower. And as you may hear in the background, it's all happening this morning. We've got pneumatic drills and the usual traffic, and all the people that meet in Gallatry Gate and flog their different wares, you know, buy this and believe that. But here we're right at the heart of the old town of Leicester. This particular spot we call the clock tower is actually on the line of the old Roman road that used to run right down from the south coast up to Lincoln, the Fosse Way. And when the Romans came, they built a bridge across the river at Westbridge, and they built their town, and they put in it the usual things the Romans couldn't do without, like baths and nice houses with mosaic pavements, and their town square and so forth. And of course they had a wall, and the wall used to go along here, along the line of Gallatry Gate and Church Gate, and then it went up Saw Lane and down on the other side to the West Bridge. But of course you can't see the wall now, because at the time of the Commonwealth, when the Civil War was on, the walls were deliberately breached, and the stones of course subsequently used for building houses and shops and offices and things. But it was on the line of Gallatry Gate, so that if you went from Gallatry Gate into the marketplace, God, I hope you can hear me, this is awful, this pneumatic drill, if you went from Gallatry Gate into the marketplace, you'd actually be going through the line of the wall, and there are some gaps in that line of shops which indicate where the breaches in the wall originally were, like the Angel Gateway. I think we could start off with looking at Gallatry Gate a little more closely, because Gallatry Gate, incidentally, the word gate doesn't mean anything to do with gates that open and shut. It's an old Scandinavian word meaning the way to somewhere. So of course Gallatry Gate was the way to the gallows tree, where you could be strung up for all sorts of minor misdemeanors. And incidentally, another name for Newark Street, if you look at the old maps, was Hangman's Lane. And if you look at the two streets, they converge just about the top of London Road Hill, so that's where you'd have had the gallows. Well now, if you look down Gallatry Gate, you'll see the shops over on the right, on the market side. The first of these little alleyways is the Angel Gateway. And that's called the Angel Gateway because until about 100 years ago, there was an inn there, an old inn called the Angel Inn. And in it, people like Mary Queen of Scots, Charles I, and Cromwell, and hordes of other people said to have stayed there because it was Leicester's most important inn. Disappeared completely now, except for one little tiny bit of woodwork, which you can see if you look up as you go through the alleyway where the Angel Inn once stood. And further down, you've got the site of the what's now NatWest Bank, but originally it was a coaching inn, and the NatWest Bank built in 1867. And on the other side, there's not much to look at. It's all very modern and rather soulless, because in the 1960s most of Gallatry Gate was felled in order to make the modern Leicester. But there is one little bit, the building which is Dorothy Perkins, is it, or Chop Chop, something like that. And it was the Stamford, Spalding and Boston Bank, and there's some rather nice heads of women looking out over the Gallatry Gate there. Now, if we turn then to Humberstone Gate, at least I'm turning to Humberstone Gate, that of course was the way to Humberstone. Big surprise. And if you look down Humberstone Gate and you can imagine yourself back 100 years, you might see there the old Humberstone Gate Fair, because that was where the last of Leicester's great fairs was held in 1904. And that was a relic of the old medieval fairs. They weren't the sort of thing that you get today on Vicky Park, where you've got lots of roundabouts and things, but it was a place where you bought things. Actually, they had a cheese fair there, so people came from all over the country to buy cheese in Leicester. And of course, down Humberstone Gate also, we've got the site of the Bell Inn. Many people remember the Bell Inn. And let's turn around again and look at Church Gate. Sorry, Belgrave Gate is the next one, isn't it? And if we were to stand by the clock tower and look down Belgrave Gate, we could see St Mark's Church at the end, standing there like a sort of beacon at the end of Belgrave Gate. And along Belgrave Gate there were a number of important people living. Mary Linwood, perhaps one of the most famous, and there's a plaque to her on one of the shops up here saying where she lived. Had a little school there. She's the one that did all the tapestries, woven pictures of people and places, over 100 of these, and they were very famous in her time, and she exhibited in Paris as well as in London. Now, opposite the place where Mary Linwood lived is Curry's, and Curry's, we all know, is the place that sells TVs, but of course it was originally a cycle shop, and Mr. Curry started his business here in Leicester in the 1880s in Painter Street, a little further down Belgrave Gate. There was also the Palace Theatre and the Floral Hall down here, sadly gone. And on the corner here, where the Pizza Hut is, there used to be a well-known chemist, Mr. Wand. And then on the next corner, you've got Church Gate. And on the corner of Church Gate, a rather fine Tudor-looking building in blue paint and black and white timbering, and some fine big gables. And on this side of the clock tower you can perhaps see the oriel window in blue again, and the decoration at the top. It does, I believe, say 1885, which is when the Duchess of Rutland opened this building as a coffee house. It's not the sort of Bruciani's place where you drop in for a coffee, so much as a place where you met people and you had a good meal. It was really rather an exclusive place. All sorts of folk met there. But the idea of the coffee house was, in fact, as a sort of alternative to the pub, because pubs were places where people went and got drunk and bashed their wives and drank all their money and this sort of thing. So the temperance people in Leicester thought that it would be a good thing to have somewhere where you could go where you didn't do all these wicked things, where you could have a good meal, a good square meal, and wholesome food and good beverages, you know, tea, coffee, cocoa, and not be tempted by the demon drink. So it was a good sort of piece of practical philanthropy and temperance, and it did very well. The Duchess, when she came here in 1885 to open this particular one, said that it was the best in the country. The Leicester Coffee and Cocoa House Company, they called it, and it made money. It actually made money as well as doing all these good works. There were over a dozen of these in Leicester at the end of the 19th century, and this is one of the more grand things. We might have a look at some other time. But this is the Eastgate's Coffee House on the corner of Churchgate, and if you go down Churchgate, of course, what do you come to? The church. Another one of those gates that lead to somewhere. Also down there, if you turn back as you get to the Shires, you'll see a little plaque saying this is where Thomas Cooper lived. He was another man who made rather a name for himself in mid-19th century Leicester. He was a Chartist. He supported the movement for votes for working men and this sort of thing. And they had fine old shindigs in Leicester in 1842, partly as a result of Thomas Cooper and his propaganda. Well, I'm going to turn around again because I want to look at High Street, and if we look up High Street we can see a number of interesting buildings, including the spire of the cathedral. Now the cathedral, of course, is an old church which goes back to medieval times, but in fact the spire wasn't built until 1862, so it's a very Victorian spire. It's also at the end of, what's that name? It's not Cank Street, it's the other one, Silver Street, that's right, Silver Street. And in Silver Street you're looking again at some interesting buildings, including the rather lovely Silver Arcade, designed in 1898 by a local man called Amos Hall. And it's worth going in there, just looking at it. Do buy some things as well, but it's a lovely little arcade. I think we don't really make enough of our Silver Arcade in Leicester. And another building I'm looking directly at is called the Irish. Many of people know that, where you buy jeans. It wasn't that originally, of course, but it was built in 1898 by the same man that designed the clock tower, Joseph Goddard. And it's one of his last buildings. Very nice decoration around the top, and some little caryatids holding up the roof. And opposite you can see the Shires building. The Shires with that green copper dome. Actually there's a copper dome you can see. That was on the corner. Some people remember Principles as having a Hudson's bookshop, and originally it was built in 1904, designed by Stockdale Harrison, the man that did the De Montfort Hall, and he designed it for Israel Hart. Now, Israel Hart was Mayor of Leicester, very flamboyant character. He was Mayor of Leicester about 3 times, and he in fact gave the fountain in Town Hall Square. Some people who've looked at the fountain will see it's donated by Israel Hart. He was a manufacturer of off-the-peg clothing. He sort of weaver-to-wearer. He made the things and sold them in his shops. And what he called his shops was the Grand Clothing Hall, and that was Leicester's Grand Clothing Hall. And next to it, this side, the one with the copper spire, it was another famous shop, Crowe and Company, and that was designed by, I think it's another Stockdale Harrison, and Morton Cowdell in 1904 again. And I mustn't take you further up High Street because you can't see it from here, but you might be able to make out against the amusement arcade sign there's a rather nice little black and gold decorative sculpture, new one, signifying the marketplace. Because of course there again you've got Cheapside. Cheapside's another old name. Cheap, you find it in places like Chipping Camden. Cheap refers to buying and selling, so of course Cheapside is part of the marketplace. And if you go in there, of course, you come to the not the clock tower, you come to the High Cross, which was not there originally, but was moved, of course, from the centre of High Cross Street and High Street, way back when it first moved in 1836. High Street originally, by the way, was called Swine's Market, so obviously that's where they sold the pigs. And most of the cattle and things would be sold around here until it moved to the Town Hall site, and from the Town Hall it moved when they built the Welford Road cattle market in 1872, it moved out there. Now let's look a bit more closely at just where we are. I should have said in Gallatry Gate, one building you must not miss, and I'd be ever so pleased if the camera could turn around and look at it just briefly, is what's now Ravel's, the Thomas Cook building. Because if you can focus on that building, it really is fascinating. It was built for Thomas Cook, the travel agent. Thomas Cook, of course, wasn't actually a Leicester person. Some people are rude about Leicester and they say that nobody ever famous came from here. It's almost true, because even Thomas Cook, who's about the most famous person to live in Leicester, wasn't actually born here. He was born in Melbourne in Derbyshire. But he lived all his life here and in Market Harborough. And one day when he was moving from Market Harborough, walking from Market Harborough to Leicester, he is on the idea of hiring a train to take some of those temperance people, the people that didn't believe in getting drunk and so forth, to take a whole trainload of people in July 1841 from Leicester to Loughborough. And so if you look at the panels up there above those nice arched windows, sounds like play school, doesn't it? If you look above the arched windows, you'll see 4 little bronze plaques. And the first one shows that train in 1841, nice old original train, the sort of thing that must have started off the Leicester Swanington Railway in 1832, one of the first railways in the world we had. In 1841 it took them to Loughborough for this little tea party, brought them back again, and that was the start of Thomas Cook's empire. When he went on in 1851, a few years later, 10 years later, he was responsible for taking more people to the great exhibition, the Crystal Palace, than anyone else in the world. And in fact his trains took people from Leicester, of course, as elsewhere, and they behaved themselves very well and all enjoyed it and said what a wonderful thing it was. And so you've got the Crystal Palace there, designed by Joseph Paxton, copy really is a glorified greenhouse, as we all know, and a train, of course, a little bit more modern. They've actually got roofs over them so they didn't get wet or snowed on. And then he actually took people to Egypt, so you've got in the next panel the pyramids and the boats on the Nile, and finally the Forth Bridge, which was built just after Thomas Cook died. He died in 1891, and the building that you can see was opened in 1894. What a pity that Thomas Cook doesn't any longer inhabit it. It seems much more sensible to be in a building like that than to move yourself to the other side of the clock tower. But there we are. I suppose they wanted a change of scene. It's what you expect from a travel agent, isn't it? Then looking finally at the clock tower, because this is why we're here, and the clock tower, you may say, well, this is an old building. It isn't really, you know, it's only 1868. And as I say, it was designed by the man that built a lot of other buildings in Leicester, Joseph Goddard. He won a competition to decide who was going to put it here. And why should he put it here? What was the purpose of this? What was here? Well, as I said, originally it was the line of the old Fosse Way, the Roman road, and that was the East Gates. The East Gates, now, they were the sort that opened and shut. You went through into the town, but they were rather narrow. So in 1774, the east gates came down, and then things could get through. You see, before then, anything big like hay wagons or coal, I nearly said coal lorries, they didn't have lorries in those days, but coal wagons and hay wagons had to stop here because they couldn't get through the old gates until, of course, they were pulled down in 1774. So that's why we've got the Haymarket here, or Coal Hill. Sometimes some old Leicester residents still refer to this as Coal Hill, Beer Hill, and other places. Not much of a hill, but they did sell things here, and it was also a sort of primitive labour exchange. But having taken down the gates, there was here an old assembly room. It's a sort of theatre. Mrs. Siddons and John Kemble actually performed here in the late 18th century, great actors and actresses. But by the early 19th century, it was pretty much of a ruin, and by the mid-19th century, it was pulled down in the early 1860s, and then there was a space. Now, if you've got a space here, can you imagine 5, 6, virtually 6 roads here, all meeting in one place, and no buildings here? And although they didn't have buses and cars and things, they did have quite a lot of traffic here. So it's quite dangerous to move, say, from Gallatry Gate across to Belgrave or Church Gate without being knocked down or in danger of being knocked down. So they actually had a traffic census, and the very first traffic census in Leicester, maybe it was the first in the country, I don't know, but the very first traffic census in Leicester was carried out on November the 23rd in 1861, and this is what they found. On that day, between 8 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock at night, there were 54,300 pedestrians passing, 2,960 vehicles. Wouldn't you love to know what the vehicles were? They were probably ponies and traps and carts and this sort of thing. And 5,900 drivers and passengers. Oh, and lots and lots of sheep and horses and pigs and so forth. But 63,166 total recorded going past here. So they needed somewhere where you could have a sort of safe refuge, a little pedestrian haven. And that's exactly what the clock tower site was by then. They moved, by the way, the vegetable market down Humberstone Gate to the site of the old Weybridge. Before that it was St Margaret's Workhouse, and some people may remember the old vegetable market down Humberstone Gate only moved about 15 years ago to the Freeman's Common site. But here they'd got a space to say, so they then had a competition to say, what should we put here? Let's put up something to glorify Leicester's worthies. And who are the worthies of the town? Well, you can see them if you look. The one we're looking at mainly here is Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester. And of course, like Thomas Cook, well, no, unlike Thomas Cook, he didn't really live here. He lived mainly in Kenilworth and places like that, and he was really a very important man, probably more important than the king, much more important than the king, because he actually deposed the king in 1264, and then finally was butchered to death in 1265 when a lot of his erstwhile mates decided they didn't like him any longer and would prefer the king back. Anyway, Simon de Montfort, because he was Earl of Leicester, is put here among the 4 worthies on the clock tower. And then we can also see Gabriel Newton. Now, he really was a Leicester body. He lived here in the mid-18th century and, of course, was the founder of the Alderman Newton Schools and a mayor of Leicester. The ones you can't see are William Wiggeston, who, again, was certainly a Leicester person in the late 15th century, and he, of course, gave the money for the ultimately for the Wiggeston Schools, Wiggeston Hospital, and a very great man indeed. One of the richest people in the country, and certainly far away the richest man in Leicester. So he gave the Wiggeston Hospital Foundation, etc. And the one we can't see, and perhaps the least known, and the one everybody says, who's he then, is Thomas White. Thomas White didn't live in Leicester at all. He was a London man, but he gave money in his will again 18th century, no, earlier than that, 1540, I think it is, something like that. He gave money in his will anyway to help start up young men in business. And so, of course, a lot of the wealthy citizens of Leicester owed something, even if it was only a couple of £100, to this Thomas White Foundation. And when they came to put up the clock tower, naturally the businessmen concerned said, well, we must put old Tom White here because he did a lot to help us on our way in success in life. And when the competition was held, as I said, it was Joseph Goddard who won the competition, and you can see he gave us one of our most Victorian Gothic buildings in Leicester. Samuel Barfield, a local builder, contractor and stonemason, designed the statues. and it's really rather a fine monument. And in fact, some people say to Leicester people, it's not only the centre of Leicester, it's the centre of the universe. Well, how about that for a finishing point? Oh, by the way, before we do, can I say anybody who wants to know more about Leicester might like to invest in a copy of this. It's a little book published by the Victorian Society. Incidentally, I'm Malcolm Elliot, chairman of the Victorian Society in Leicester, and this is written by Richard Gill, who's far more famous because he's actually been on national TV recently, and he wrote this series of walks through Leicester, Victorian Leicester. They're only £2.50. You get them most good bookshops or from Victorian Society, and it's well worth it because you can actually follow them round, very easily done, following round maps, nicely labelled with all the details you want to know.